Yeah.
Those in people. Part of the board is for
Mm.
sure to mute yourself
Thank you. Oops, that's not what I wanted. I wanted to do a general share. There we go. What's that not? Oh, there we go. Weird. Okay, let's go ahead and start getting into it for the day. So today, as I mentioned, and is on the schedule, we're just going to be doing a review of quiz 1. If by some miracle we manage to get through talking about quiz 1, and we still have time left on the clock, then we'll start talking about MCTS today. Otherwise, that's going to be on Wednesday. All right, so some announcements before we jump into it. There are literally 4 slides today because we're mostly going to be looking at the quiz PDF. 84 out of 88 students submitted quiz 1, which is okay, but it's not great. I assume those last 4 are just going, oh, well, you have to drop the lowest one. But like, that's real risky behavior. I don't know if I'd do that. Anyway, generally pretty good. A fourth of the quiz 1 submissions are marked. The median right now is 8.4 out of 9, which is pretty good. That's like 93%. Now, notably, that is with a mistake that I made, which is in your favor, meaning that basically everybody got an extra credit point for free. We'll talk about that in a sec. I will record and then release an assignment 2 helper video tonight, just like I did for assignment 1 on the Monday before that was due. On Wednesday, we're going to transition from talking about pathing, which we've been doing basically the entire semester so far, to talking about decision making, our next big topic. On Thursday, we will have an in-person help session, I guess, question mark. We're going to ask, I'm going to ask a question about that in the participation question. That'll be in just a second. And then finally, quiz 1 scores plus feedback should be released by Sunday. In fact, the TAs told me that they think they're going to have them largely be done by like the end of this week. I'm not so sure about that, but we'll see. You know, I might be able to say like, hey, Thursday, Friday, here's all the quiz stuff. Regardless, you should have a general idea of how you did after today. Cool. Then finally, next Monday, week from today, we have assignment 2 is due, 11:55 p.m. Immediately, there's a question. Give me 1 second. The same late policy applies, which means that you have 23 and 59 minutes or whatever it is. Or no, it's just 23, right? Just 23 hours after that you have available to you for grace period. If you need more time than that, let me know as soon as possible. You had a question. Thursday is the holiday, yeah. Which also brings into question this in-person help session, huh? Yeah, I don't know. We could maybe do something with like changing it to Friday. I don't really know. Let me actually give me 1 second. I'm gonna literally change because I was gonna ask a question about online or in person, but that's before I realized that Thursday was a holiday. Or rather remembered, because it's on my calendar. But I wasn't thinking I had to teach. So check this out. We're gonna change this question to when should we do the help session? Check it out. Wednesday evening. Oops, I can spell. Friday evening. It's definitely going to be online then because we're not going to have space. I don't even need it. Okay, cool. Speaking of, there's a quick poll. Just immediate. Yeah, so basically, I just want to get a sense of how the quiz was versus your expectations. I want to get a sense of if there's any particular comments that you had on the quiz. And then, yeah, I mean, slight change to that question, right? But what's up with the help session? I like how this Zoom keeps on like pausing me at really awkward moments. Yeah, it just doesn't come back. How weird. Oh, well. Are we going to do the review for the whole class today? Yes. Question is, I'm 3 minutes behind. Hopefully I just answered that question for you. Let's stop sharing for a second. I do actually need the camera for this. Start a virtual camera if need be. But I don't want to have to do that. Bizarre. Maybe what I'll do is I will leave and rejoin this. That might be the easiest way to do that. Enforcing a camera. I do that. Leave the meeting. No, actually, I can't do that because then I'm not the host anymore. Never mind. It'll just get more complicated. So I'm trying to figure out camera because I'm going to need camera for working on. Oh, my camera's just straight up turned off. What the heck? My camera is busted. Cool. Huh. What do I want to do about that? There's one thing I could do. Sorry, folks. Give me 1 second. I have to invite myself to the meeting. All right. For now, we can go ahead and go back to this, share screen, and voila. Cool. So let's see. So far, people are saying with 36 responses, it's about what you expected overwhelmingly. Some people thought it was harder a little bit. Some people thought it was much easier. One person thought it was much easier, and a few people thought it was easier. All right. So I feel pretty good about that. And people are voting for Wednesday evening in terms of a, oh, no, Friday evening. I missed up the colors there. Friday evening help. All right. I can try to figure that out, and I will get back to y'all. This is just voting. None of these votes are binding. Do not ask me to do that. Okay, let me go ahead. I have to get myself onto this Zoom call with a second account. Modern technology. Was it not going to let me? That's so funny. Okay. Hello. No, it's just not working. Wow, literally won't let me do any. So funny. Yeah, okay, my polling session's inactive. That's fine. Okay, we'll deal with that in a sec. Okay, I think I have everything set up so that I can do a virtual whiteboard on my iPad. And I will just share the screen, which is going to be a wild thing for everybody here. But you know what? We're going to deal with it. All right, so to begin with, there were some multiple choice questions. Now, for those of you who went through and added up the points, you'll have realized that, in fact, even though I say here that the points should add up to 9, somewhere over here, I don't remember exactly where it's at. Yeah, towards the end of that line, first line. In fact, the points added up to 10. The problem was that these multiple choices were supposed to be 0.5 points each, not 0.75 points each. Oops, I just miswrote that. And so because of that, there's basically an extra point on the quiz. You're welcome. I'm not going to punish you for my mistake there. Just makes this first quiz a little bit easier, and therefore an even bigger mistake for the 4 people who didn't submit it, unlike all of you who are all great and clearly submitted it and got the extra point. Okay, so question 1. Which of the following describes the way most modern AAA games distribute computation power? I'm just going to have you all raise your hands. Cool? So raise your hands for a 50-50 split between graphics and AI. Raise your hands for a majority of computation to AI. Wouldn't that be nice? Raise your hands for a majority of computation for graphics. Wonderful. And D for none of the above. Of course, it was C. In fact, I had literally had that on slides. And also, I had asked you that as a practice question. I could not have primed you more to pick that answer. So far, in the 1/4 of the quizzes that I marked, nobody got that wrong. But who knows, right? It's always possible. Question 2. What is one benefit of path networks over nav meshes? Immediately getting more little trickier. So who thinks that the answer was A, nav meshes are more restrictive? Who thinks the answer was B, easier for designers to constrain AI behavior? Okay, some hands, less confident hands. Who thinks it was C, they have much cheaper runtime costs? Some people. And who thinks it was D, all of the above? Let's go through this. We basically had votes for B's and C's. So A, nav meshes are more restrictive. Well, that's definitely not true, right? We all know that's not true. The whole point of a nav mesh is you can wander around it as much as you like. It is easier for designers to constrain AI behavior. Now, this is interesting, right? If it is a hand-authored path network, then we, in fact, are telling the agents exactly where we want them to go when they are pathing. When we're off the path, we don't have that much control. But when they're on the path, we know exactly where they're going to be. We can also add all those extra nodes we were talking about. Now, we can also have a nav mesh, which is hand tweaked, right? Which is changed for a particular space. But in that case, we aren't telling the agent exactly where to go, right? We're giving them an area to go in. We're not constraining the behavior as tightly. So B is looking like a contender. C, they have a much cheaper runtime cost. Now, this one's tricky because I'm asking you for generally what is one benefit of path networks over nav meshes. It is not the case that generally they have a much cheaper runtime cost because a nav mesh uses a path network. So in that case, in most cases, they'd have the same runtime cost. But if you wanted your path network to have as much content or as much freedom as a nav mesh, then yes, they would have a more significant runtime cost. But that's for one particular case, right? So this is not as good of an answer. And then D, it obviously can't be none of the above because these are directly contradictory. So it's got to be B. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Question C. Nav clues, the special generated path network nodes used in Sunset Overdrive, can be created based on which of the following? This one's pretty straightforward. It's just that they didn't literally use some of this like nomenclature, but it's synonymous, right? So path network nodes were based on the player's position, right? You saw them creating new nav clues based on where the player was. There was all those videos of those little like radial spheres popping up, right? Objects in the world, yes, right? Because we saw that when there was like particular lines, cars generating nav meshes, there were also buildings generating nav meshes. Interesting locations, there was specifically discussion of calculating interesting locations relative to player. So therefore, it's got to be D, all of the above. Okay, is that clear? All right, question 4. This one's a fun one, I think, but I'm weird like that. So I want you to assume that you're in an empty 8x8 grid. That means there's no obstacles. There's nothing to get caught on. What I want you to do is give me the ranking of computation cost from least to most of these pathing methods. Okay, let's do this one again. So who thinks it's A? APSP is the least, A star is the most. Who thinks it is B? APSP is the least, but A star next, then greedy is the most. Who thinks it's greedy is the least, then APSP, then A star. And all three would be roughly equivalent. Oh, nice spread this time. Let's talk about it. All pairs shortest paths. The runtime cost, if we're moving it through an environment, right? Let me actually go ahead and People are chatting. Was the answer to question 2B? Yes, thank you. Isn't that easy? Let me do this. Because what I want to do is I use this whiteboard, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this virtual whiteboard. Whoop. Is that going to work? Yeah. You just have to deal with my Gazelle at Alberta spread. That's fine. You all can live, I assume. So let's assume that we had a grid, right? This is going to be a really ugly grid. Just heads up, I'm not an artist. It's in fact just a 4x4 instead of an 8x8. But you know what? I think you all can figure out that this is going to extend pretty nicely. Let's say that we have a little agent, a little fellow, and their goal is to get over here. So if this is all pairs shortest paths, when we are figuring out the path to get from the bottom left corner to the top right corner, what's the computation cost? You can think of this in terms of big O computation. Yeah, correct. It's just a lookup table. Literally all we have to do is say, hey, this grid cell that I'm in, where do I go if I'm trying to get to this goal? And it's going to tell me if I can go diagonally, go here. And if I can't go diagonally, then it's going to tell me go here. And then this one will tell me to go here, then here, then here, then here, then here. It is exactly going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lookups on a dictionary. Just 6 pieces of computation. That's it. Literally 6 calls to a dictionary. That's it. APSB has to be the least. All right? Does that make sense? Okay, so if we know APSB is the least, oh, that was weird. Why is that P so much darker than that P? Not important. What comes next, right? What is happening? This is a weird setup. So let's talk about greedy, right? Let's talk about the difference between greedy and A star. So let's say that diagonal movement is not allowed, right? If diagonal movement is not allowed, then there are going to be cases where greedy, right, is going to grab the next spot. Whoa, that's an eraser. That's not what I wanted. The next location, right, that is closest to the goal and set that to the current node. And then we're going to keep doing that. Closest to the goal, closest to the goal, closest to the goal, closest to the goal, right? There's some extra computation here because we're having to check each of the neighbors to say which one is closest to the goal. So it's roughly 4 times as many checks as we're having to do from APSB to greedy. Because in every spot, we're going to check every neighbor and say, hey, which of these 4 is closest to the goal? And then we're going to pick that one, right? Now, in comparison to that, again, I don't know the exact heuristic here, but the exact heuristic doesn't matter like all that much. If this is A star, there's a few things that can be happening here. First, for A star, right, we're going to be tracking more information. In addition to our open set, we're also going to have a closed set, which we're going to have to check, which means that as we get further along, we're going to be doing extra checks, more extra checks than we weren't doing at the beginning. We're also going to have this thing happening where we have to pick the thing that has the smallest open set or the smallest cost in the open set, right? In this priority queue. And that's going to be a problem because basically everything through this section is all going to have the same F score. If you don't believe me, we can do this check real quick. So let's talk about this one. It's going to have a G score of 1 because we'd have just gotten there from the entrance. And then for an F score, let's say that it's in Manhattan distance. It truly doesn't matter because it's going to be the same, but let's pretend. Be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That'll be a 5. And so a total, H, and then an F score of 6, right? Let's go to this next one. This is going to have to be a G score of 2. And for an H score, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, F score of 6. Now, in the quiz, I told you can pick any option that is equally good in your open set, right? And many of you took that to your advantage in order to ignore having to do extra work, which is fine. That's smart. In this case, though, there's a lot of extra computation we're having to do, right? In the worst case, we're having to check every single one of these nodes, right? And even in the not worst case, we're having to do an extra check to our closed set, which means that we have to be doing more than greedy at every step. Does that make sense? So the ranking has to be, there's no choice, but the ranking to be APSB least, greedy is the next, and then finally A star as the most expensive. Cool? All right, now I get to swap back to a different screen. Are people chatting about something that I should know about? No, okay. People are just saying yes. That's nice. It's good to say yes to answer people's questions. All right, on to this bit. So this first part, this is your, oh, sorry, you have a question, yeah. Sorry, can you say that again? Question 2, okay. Let's look back at that. Okay, so question 2. Close the door. You can place the nodes where you want, yeah, but I'm not saying just influence. I'm saying constrain. The verb choice is really important, right? Nav meshes are offering more freedom, right? But that also means the agents are going to move to places that we may potentially not want them to move to at particular moments. With a path network, we can literally just constrain, say exactly where we want the AI agent to be moving when it's moving along the path. Does that make sense? That's the distinction. I know that the question is a little bit tricky. It is meant to be a little bit tricky, right? Any other questions on these multiple choices before we move on? Okay. Okie dokie. So question 5. So this is your first of these sort of like fill in the blank style questions. This first part should have been easy for everybody. All you had to do, right, was to give me a total set of between 4 and 6 cells that were covered up, where there was still going to be a path from A to F, right? And where your answer was at least 3 different than mine. 3 changes different than mine. The only case where I've seen this not be the person getting this right was when they only made exactly 3 changes from what I gave. Otherwise, everybody's gotten this part fine, right? The simplest way to do this, and it's totally fine to do, is, I'm just going to do this on this side. The simplest thing to do, right, is to pick the 4 locations or the up to 6 locations, right, that are going to most constrain the path. So you can literally do something like this. In fact, I saw a number of people do this, where you have sort of like an L shape, right? It's going to take up those. And then you could have a, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you could have like a 1, 2 like this, right? And then you've literally constrained the path all the way down to it has to just be through here. That's it, right? You have no options in terms of the current node versus the path. It's literally going to be the same nodes because it has to be. Otherwise, if you didn't do something like that, then your open set, your current node might lead to a slightly different behavior. But that would have been the sort of the default answer that I would have expected. Any questions on this first bit? This first bit I think should be relatively simple, just following instructions. Okay, so then for this bit. So we had a number of people who got very confused and were trying to think like that I wanted the F score when I literally say you do not have to list the open set or the GH or F scores. It's in the question. All you needed here was a sequence of letters, right? You just need the sequence of letters of the values of the current node variable that's in the A* pseudocode that I gave you. That's it. Now, for most of you, because you were clever, all you had to do was give me the exact same list of nodes that would be your final path, right? And because I allowed you to pick anything that was equally good. The only cases where people are losing points for this one is either one, if they completely misunderstood it and they just give me gobbledygook, which does happen, or alternatively, if they had a situation where A* would have explored a different sort of path that seemed like it was going to get you closer to the goal, but it actually wasn't, right? So if you did something, you know, where you sort of like, you made it seem like, oh, you could go this way. So like, let's say that we had an obstacle covering like I and J, right? A* would want to go ABC, at which point it would get caught, right? Because these are the cheapest nodes relatively, and then you would end up going away. Question?
Yeah. Go up to the drawing that you had.
Sure.
Basically, what I did for mine.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, like.
I'm gonna redo it.
The only thing is I didn't cover the K. So when I was writing my notes, I said that A* would visit K.
Uh-huh.
Look it up. that, and then I just said it was not used in the actual path of, like, but is that still fine?
That's fine.
Okay.
You're not going to lose points if you had things that A star could have picked because it had the same F score. The real thing that you're looking for here is if there's ever a case where you randomly go up and then back down in F score, or you go down and then back up in F score, these could be a problem. If you're continually rising in F score values as you're going along, you're fine. Cool. Any other questions? Yes.
I have a question about the same thing. So in mine, I didn't cover the L.
You didn't cover the L. Okay.
Yeah. And so for my A star, would A star like go to T and then look at L and then look at U?
So no. So let's think about it, right? So I don't know exactly what the situation was here, but regardless, T would have a fixed G-score value,
Yeah.
right? Whatever the G-score value was,
Yeah.
that's the value that you got to get there. From there, right, L would be one more,
Yeah.
and U would be one more in terms of G-score. In terms of H-score, right, U is 1, 2, 3, and L is 1, 2, 3. So L or U, it doesn't matter. Does that make sense?
But like in an actual game like algorithm, would it check both? Both ways?
No, not necessarily. It's about whatever the tie-breaking rule is that's being used in the priority queue.
Okay.
So for example, in your assignment, the tie-breaking is recency. But for example, right, if it was just like the last thing that was added, right, then we would have go, okay, let's add L, and U to our priority queue. At that point, if it was recency, the last thing added, we would pop U.
Okay.
From there, we would get V, right, which has 2 more G-score from there, but also 1 less H-score for the same F-score between V and L. If it's recency again, then we pop V, then we pop N, then we pop N, and then we get there.
Okay.
Cool.
Gotcha.
Any other questions? Okay, and then give the final path determined by your answer to Q5B. Sorry, is there a question in the chat? Using this heuristics, if B and H was open, A star would look at B instead of H, right? I don't know. Let's see. If B and H is open, yes, you would look at B instead of H because B has a lower H score than H, or B has a lower, yes, B has a lower heuristic score than H. Let me say it like that rather than 2 different meanings of H. Okay, yeah, final path should be relatively straightforward, right? I don't think anybody lost points on that one. Actually, no, that's not true. Somebody randomly added an extra node when I was marking from their answer to question 5B that the A star agent didn't even consider that they added in for question 5C. No idea why that happened. Probably just a mistake, but that was a lost points. Otherwise, it was totally fine. Okay, question 5D. Okay, so, whoa, that's not what I wanted. Path smoothing, a whole bunch of people lost at least a little bit of some percentages of some points on this. Common mistakes were things like not reading the instructions. Let me actually get back to the instructions. I specifically say to assume that the pathing agent sits in the center of a grid cell and has a radius equal to 1/2 of a grid cell's width, aka it takes up nearly the whole cell. Some of you had path smoothing, which would lead to cutting off edges. That would lead to the agent would not actually be able to see this next state, but your path smoothing had to cut those edges. Like for example, going from K to S, which would not be okay because the agent wouldn't be able to see from K to S because if we're doing a raycast in between, we're going to hit this point right here. So we can't go from K to S with the path smoothing. Other things that people didn't do, if you just had a straightaway, let's see, like your path had to going from O to V. A whole bunch of people just listed every single point in that. Path smoothing also, with the algorithm that I gave you, also is going to get rid of interleaving points if you're just going in a straight line. Okay? Any questions on path smoothing? Those are the 2 big problems I saw. Yeah.
So for example, like if we were having like path, like there wasn't an obstacle at I, for example, if we would go I, A, I, Q, or would that work or no?
I, A, I, Q. What? If you have an obstacle at I,
If you don't have an obstacle at
if
I.
you don't have an obstacle at I, if this whole area is open,
Yeah.
then yeah, you can go to A to Q. That's fine. Because there's, again, if I straight line distance here, I'm not going to do anything. This is also, your answer to Q5A actually came up here. So some people literally drew like a triangle that covered some obstacles, but which wouldn't get into the way of doing a straight line distance check. And so because of that, they were able to do a path smoothing through. But if you did something like this answer, then I have no choice but to assume that the obstacle is taking up the entirety of that cell. At which point, for example, you wouldn't be able to go from like B to R because you clip right there. Cool? Yes.
Suppose the left side is all open.
Yeah.
And we go from A to Y.
Can we go to A to Y?
R.
I. Yeah.
No, A to R.
A to R. Okay. Yes. Also. Again. Imagine you're a little Pac-Man, right? If Pac-Man can move straight line distance to R without bumping into anything, you're good to go. Anybody else? Yes. Yes. A blockage in I. A to where? A to P. No. H to P. Also no. Okay, cool. Glad to give you the answer you wanted. Any other questions on path smoothing? Okay. This is why I said we're going to do the full time for the quiz one, because there's going to be a lot of questions like this. Later on, you'll get used to it. You'll get used to my kind of quizzes, but for this first one. Okay, Q6. So for Q6, I basically wanted you to give me a different spatial representation, right? Or argue for using the same one. So either give me, say, hey, I should have used path networks or nav meshes for this environment, or go ahead and say, no, grids are good. The only thing that actually matters, the only place that you get points for this is the two reasons that you gave, okay? For this, I'm really looking for things which are distinct to that spatial representation. So if you said something like grids, you could say, for example, that the environment matched up, right? That it fit a grid really well. You could also say something like one of the other positives about grids, like in the pros and cons sections that I gave you in your notes, like saying, for example, that path planning works really well on grids, right? Or saying something like, the movement doesn't need a lot of diagonal movement because of the way the environment looks, things like that. Or that it's not going to be too much slower than doing something else because it's a small enough environment, right? Things like that. For path networks, you could say something like, oh, it's going to be a lot faster, well, relatively, to grids. You could say something like, my environment works really well with path networks because you only need so many nodes, right? You can say something like, you're not going to have to go off of the path network very much. Same thing with nav meshes, right? The environment could support that. You could say, I have this big open area in this part of my answer. And because of that, a nav mesh makes sense. You can freely move through that section, right? You could say something like, generally nav meshes are considered to be the best in terms of allowing the most freedom of movement, most kinds of movement that you can have. You could say something like, a path network and a nav mesh are basically going to be the same in terms of the movement of the space, right? The places where people lose points are when they say things, the same thing twice. So I had a number of people that said something like, it'd be faster and it'd be faster. And like, no, you only get points for one of those, sorry. I've also had people lose points for saying something and then just saying the opposite. So saying something like, well, we should use a nav mesh because it's more open, and we shouldn't use a grid because it's more restrictive. You also don't get points for that. But those are the primary places that people were losing points. Any questions on 6? No? You'll feel pretty good about that? Okay. Anybody in the chat? Great. All right, 7. Let's see. How can I do this most easily? I'll just draw it on here. This is going to be a nightmare. That's fine. That's fine. Just have to deal with my really ugly drawing. Okay, so the basic idea here, right, is that I wanted you to give me a valid nav mesh, right? Do I even say, yeah, with full coverage. So you have to have full coverage of the space, right? That minimizes the total number of polygons in the mesh. All right. So before we get to anything else, I can tell you the minimum number of polygons for this mesh is 9. If you had above 9, that's a problem. If you had below 9, it's probably because you had a concave polygon, and that's a problem. There's several answers that you could have given me outside of that. So I'll just give you a quick example one. Just again, sorry, but this is just what it's going to be. We ran into this situation. We have to live with it. So you're gonna have a big one up here, right? I had a whole bunch of people that wanted to break this triangle into like this polygon into 2 or 3 different polygons. I think largely because they didn't think that you could have a polygon that large. But again, the only things in terms of the validity of polygons is that it should be convex, not concave. It shouldn't overlap with any obstacles or any other polygons. That's true of this, so we're good. From there, we do need one triangle. Here's our triangle. This is the only triangle that you should have needed. Everything else can be a more than four-sided shape or more. Then we have another little friend over here, sort of weird trapezoid. We have another long trapezoid over here. Again, remember that I said to assume that lines were parallel if they appeared parallel. That means that we can have just a straight line across that whole section. But even if it wasn't exactly parallel, as long as it wasn't going to lead to being concave, we're fine. So that's fine. Then we can pretty easily just go ahead and close up this spot, this side, get one more trapezoid in here. Then we get this middle section. So covering the around this area section, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 polygons, right? Again, there's a few different ways you could have done this. You could have cut through here and like done a section through here weirdly, and then just had an extra section over here. That would have been okay. Some people did that. Some people cut through this a number of different ways, but this is generally, I think, the most common answer and the intended one. Then to close up this space, we just need 4 more polygons. We got one right here, another weird trapezoid, one right here, another weird trapezoid. Again, you could assume these are parallel, but even if they weren't, because they do look slightly skewed, it's still fine because it's not concave. If they were bending inwards, right, concave, that's a problem, but they're bending outwards. So even if they're not exactly parallel, it's fine. One more trapezoid right here, and then a final really weird 5-sided shape over here to end us out. All right, we have one question in the chat. Would this question be 1 point per polygon and 0 points otherwise? No. I give partial credit for everything. So it's, I think it's, I've written in the key already, it's 0.1 points. You'll get the key as well, by the way. Once the TAs have finished marking up the quiz, you'll get the key. But it's like 0.1 for every concave or every polygon above what you would actually need. And they take the minimum between these two. So if you had 3 concave polygons, but you were 4 polygons under, then you only lose 0.3 points on this. Cool. Any questions on this one? Yeah.
So instead of connecting F and G, can we connect A and
A and G. Yeah, yeah. So that's one of the ones I mentioned, right? So again, as long as you're at 9, you're chill. But yeah, so another one that I saw. Oh, this is gonna be really ugly if I try to draw this line. I'll try. Nope. PDF viewers already telling me, don't do it. Don't do it, Matthew. So yeah, you could have done this line, this really ugly line I just did, but what if it was straighter, right? And then you could have had because this is just gonna look bad. Anyway, yes, it's possible. You just had another triangle through here, basically. Yeah, that looks slightly better. Yeah, this would also have been okay. Yeah. Yep. I don't know what you mean.
Like everything's supposed to go like 0.5, right? And then you actually don't put 5, so we that's stuff more the correct amount of marks, the left mark, whatever. But it's still a fine mark.
It's out of pretend it's still out of 9. Everybody just gets an extra point. That's it. Yes. Sorry, can you say that again? The lines between nodes. Oh, that's fine. If you didn't complete these, that's fine. Don't worry about that. Anybody else? Yeah, just as a heads up, I don't ever do any there's no curving, there's no nothing, there's nothing weird, there's no averaging in this class. Literally every point you get in this class is 1 point towards your final grade. So 1 point is, 10% of another letter grade, basically. That's if you want to think about it that way. It's just summation. Okay, so there's several questions here. Isn't EFKPO concave? EFK, yeah, well, that's not a polygon, that's an obstacle. I wasn't drawing that one, Maristella. Aren't nav meshes supposed to consist only of triangles? Nope. Yeah, this is an obstacle. Just to be 100% clear, I can draw little dashes. Here we go. These are obstacles. These are obstacles. No, it's already mucking up. These are obstacles. The rest are polygons. This is why I didn't want to have to draw this like this. It's going to get confusing. Fun says, so just want to confirm the total number of meshes 9, it'll be fine, right? As long as they're all convex. Do we need to draw over the obstacle line? Nope. That was the last question that was in person. Okay, there are no other questions. Okay, we move on. All right, question 8, the last for real question. This one, first bit was really easy. It's another one of pick ones, right? You had to pick one of each of these groups. The only thing that I asked is that you don't pick mine, which was friendly, intelligent, fast player companion. Somebody did pick mine. You only lost points for Q8A, but please listen to instructions. Okay. From there, what I want you to do, once you gave me your NPC and any extra material about that, was that I want you to do 3 things, right? Give me your spatial representation, your pathing approach, and then a steering, smoothing, whatever other methods to impact the paths that you would use. Cool? So for all of these, right, needed to communicate the character. This was crucial. A whole bunch of you, again, the only thing that matters when I give you questions like this is your justification. Anything, almost anything will work as long as it's justified correctly. But if you were just telling me like, oh, I used a nav mesh because it's always best, you didn't get points for the spatial representation. You had to tie it back to the character you used, either implicitly or explicitly. I had a whole bunch of people that said, well, we'll use nav mesh and A star because it's just always the best to do those things. And no, you didn't get points for that. You do get some points. I think you get 0.3 for most of the first 2 points. We did something like that. But generally what I was looking for, right, was something to tie these things in, right? So if you described a character that would have to like move around a lot, then a nav mesh, right, makes the most sense. If you were doing something where you described a character that could just follow a particular path, right, maybe like a mindless antisocial character or something like that, then a path network would be fine, or even a grid would be fine. But you have to tie it back like that. For the pathing approach, right, you basically had 3 options here. You could say all pairs shortest paths, you could say A star, or you could say greedy. Because those are the only ones I've told you about so far. And in all cases, you can tie those back, right? So if it's an intelligent agent, APSP or A star makes sense, right? If it's not intelligent agent, if it's mindless, right, or otherwise sort of had this other thing that could be going on, if you only had 2 options, greedy would probably make the most sense, right? Because if it's mindless, then you could be okay with it sort of charging into things. Unless it was mindless and slow, then you might say, well, we'll use something like A star, but we'll communicate the mindlessness elsewhere, like the kinematic wander. Speaking of, the last part is the steering smoothing methods to modify the given paths. You did not have to state given steering approaches. You could invent your own, but it had to be a steering approach. A whole bunch of people described a new pathing approach for part 3 for some reason. They were like, here's how we would do pathing, just from start to end. That's not what's going on here. I asked you for an approach to modify a given path, not to create your own path. So you'd lose points for that. But otherwise, as long as you said something and you tied it back, right, then you're fine. Intelligent, so it's going to be smooth. It's going to be fast, so it's going to be smooth. It's mindless, so kinematic wander, right? It's a swarm, so voids, these kinds of things. Does it make sense? Yeah.
So like, what's the difference between text-based and swarm?
That was up to you in your description. You could have said, for both of them, you could have said, well, if it's pack-based or it's in a swarm, we'll use voids. I would have accepted that. If you'd said pack-based and you want it to be like highly regimented, you could have said like, we'll use formations to guide where it goes exactly.
Also for the spatial representation, can I say it's a nav match because my character is in an open world?
So that's not related to the character, that's related to the game. So probably not, but I'd have to see the answer. Anybody else have questions on this? The could be of away questions. For path blending, what if I said it follows the player? That's not a path blending approach, Maristella. Does nav clues work? Nav clues by themselves, just saying the words nav clues, no. But depending on how you described it, Ivan, again, it might work. If you have a question about your specific answer, I would wait until you get your quizzes back, and then you can, ask me. Okay. Finally, right on time, extra credit. This extra credit was designed to be tricky, and I think it was fairly tricky. So far, in the 1/4 of people that I have marked, only one person got full marks for the extra credit. Now, again, the extra credit is extra credit, right? You don't even need it. And plus, you got an extra 1 point anyway. But let's talk about it. I think the easiest way to do that is, well, let me talk about it here, and then I'll do an example. So for A, right, you had to give me at least 3 rules, right? The important thing about the rules is that it shouldn't be obvious that it's going to lead to a deadlock, right? I used it in terms of being reasonable. I should have been able to look at it and not immediately be able to tell this is going to lead to a deadlock in every situation. Several people gave me rules that would have to lead to a deadlock in every single situation. Those would not be reasonable, right? As a general rule, if you were referring to multiple different entities through each of these, or also different variables that you're referring to for each of these, you're going to be good for this part. As long as it was possible to lead to a deadlock, because some people just wrote down 3 rules off the top of their head, and I don't think that they could lead to a deadlock because they didn't answer part B. And I couldn't see it, so they didn't get points for that. Or you did get a little bit of like extra points, right? You could use 0.1. The simplest way to do this, because I said you could use alignment down below, would be to have one rule refer to something like the closest entity. The second rule refer to a different variable, like the furthest away entity or the midpoint between the other 2 entities. And the last rule deal with the alignment. That'd be the simplest way to do this. A lot of people did more complex things. For part B, I'll give you an example of one solution in a second. But for part B, I asked you to give me an example with at least 3 entities caught in this scenario. This text is key. A whole bunch of people tried to give me an example with only 1 entity caught in a deadlock. That didn't fit the brief. You didn't get full marks for that. Some people tried to give me an example with 2 entities caught in a deadlock. That also didn't fit the brief. You didn't get full points for that. Cool? Any questions generally on this before I give you an example of a solution? So, let me stop share here and start share. Oh no, this is just the existing chat questions. Yeah. Share content, whiteboard. Okay. Pop up. Great. Okay, so really simple, right? Let's look at the simplest version of this. So let's have one rule which says that we want to be far away from our closest entity. This is going to be equivalent to the separation rule from Boyd's, right? So we're going to have one rule. The specifics here do not matter. Just one. We can move one. Or sorry, let me type this. Write this out fully. Move 1 away from closest entity. It didn't have to be more specific than that. This would be sufficient. Okay? And then move the second one, move 1 towards midpoint of group, excluding self. So with these 2 rules, right, it's clear how we could lead to a deadlock, right? They could cancel each other out, but they're not going to cancel each other out in every scenario, right? In most situations, they're not going to immediately cancel each other out, especially if we have more than 3 entities. Does that make sense? And then finally, the throwaway rule, because I told you could use alignment, fix alignment to match group. So basically a throwaway rule. And then, so that would be part A, chill. Part B. For this part, you just have to give me a scenario where this is going to be true. Here's a very trivial one. 3 entities in a row, in a line. From any perspective of any entity, right? What we're going to do is we're going to move it towards its closest entity, and then we're going to move it in the opposite direction. Because the midpoint is always going to be on the other side. Except for our friend right here. But guess what? It doesn't matter. Pick either one of these as our closest entity. We go away from it, and then the midpoint's in the same location, so we're going to go right back. Simplest solution. Does that make sense? I know this one was tricky. It was intended to be tricky. All the extra credits are going to be tricky. That's just how they are. I do appreciate the people who tried it, though, or at least wrote something, right? You do get points for that. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. Jump back over to here. Okay, and that was quiz 1. 2 minutes left. Any questions? Any other questions on quiz 1? No? We can go ahead and end like a minute early. As per the usual, I'll hang out here for a little bit if you want to come up and ask me questions. Otherwise, I'll talk to you all Wednesday. Bye, Zoom people. Well, actually, I'll keep the Zoom open for a minute just in case anybody asks me any last minute questions. But otherwise, you're free to run, Zoom people.
For assignment 2.
Yep.
Does your code like the we're editing on what was it called, A* having it? And then there was also another one called A* something. But I did something in my code that like affected when I clicked like on the game scene that it didn't like make happy ending. He just kind of said that and gave me like an error. So I'm just wondering, like, does one script affect another? One to the point that the other one breaks.
All the scripts affect each other.
Oh, okay.
If you have an error in any script, it's not going to run.
Yeah.
I have a question for assignment. Do we allow diagonal movements for assignment?
For assignment 2,
Yeah.
no.
So only like up, down, and left.
As it's been the case for assignment 1, yeah.
For the extra credit for the quiz 1, what if one of the entities like it's like a hole on the ground? So it's like it's still like calling the scenario.
So that if it's a hole in the ground, then it always has to be in a deadlock position, right?
Yeah.
It was important that all the entities be affected by the rules, right? And all of them be possible to either be moving or caught in a deadlock.
So it's kind of be like it's just calling the scenario.